Good evening. Good evening. My name is Winston Michael Ray. Many of you are probably familiar with my name and my work on social media outlets that I've been putting out content over the past 2 years, I guess. We'll get more into that. But before I get into my little talk, I want to give the Creator, the Lord of the worlds, his due respect. I want to thank Almighty God, the Creator of the universe, for allowing me this opportunity to be here with you today on a somewhat cool and cloudy Thursday, December the 19th, 2025. The time is about 3:15, going into 3:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Brooklyn, New York, where I am doing this, I would say about 45-minute video. On this day, 125 years ago, a very dear friend of the nation, uh, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., the father, biological father of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his two siblings, Willie Christine Farris and A.D. King, Alfred Daniel, was born in Stockbridge, Georgia. It was on this day, December 19, 1899, that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., affectionately known as Daddy King, made his entrance into the world and, of course, grew up and met his wife and started a family, and the rest is history. So, I dedicate this video to Daddy King on his 125 year birth entrance anniversary to us from Stockbridge. I want to also thank the viewing audience and listening audience who will take the time out to listen to what I think they really need to hear, really truly need to hear. I won't keep you long, and I'm going to get into my little talk. I want to start off, before I get into that, I want to give you my contact information. I'm going to kind of pick it up. Anyone who want to reach me after they view this video, you can on my cell, Winston Michael Ray, that's me, at 347-855-1704. Go to TikTok and type in Billy Bob 1. It's spelled kind of strange, capital B as in boy, the number 1, LLY, B again, the number 0, B again, the number 1. So that's B1LLY, B0B1. There you'll see 84, how should I say, very colorful and illustration and text information you see on my TikTok page. 3 rows across, 28 rows down. And once you put up those documents, it's the other information how to get to my YouTube pages, which this video will be on. Winston and Baby Alive at the Capitol. And you'll see it all at the bottom of all of the TikTok pages and the standard heading, Worldwide, SILVER, $S, Worldwide Silver Rights Movement. Yes, folks, the world is moving into a new age in the 21st century, going into the last 75 years of the 21st century. So you have that contact information. And what I would like to start off by doing, I think the nation, especially this young generation, I'm 66, but upcoming generation, I would say up to newborn up to, let's say, 50, should hear this. I don't know if they heard some of these excerpts of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Excerpts and some of his speeches that was very inspiring to me. And boy, I tell you, he was as a minister said back in Montgomery, Dr. Vernon Johns, the man that preceded him at Dexter Avenue Church, he's one heck of a speaker. So without further delay, I'm going to get into 5 short excerpts of Dr. King, and then we're going to get to the meat of what I'm talking about, which is him explaining the sociological effects of mass action, which he delivered before the American Jewish Committee here in New York City on May 20th, 1965, Dateline, New York. And he explains his position on why he used the methods and the tactics, the historical value it had, the present value it was giving, and the future value that it can give if we adhere to those principles. So, without further delay, I want to start with some of the excerpts of Dr. King. I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. You can't accept it. You will leave those state troopers blooded with their own barbarity. If you can't accept it, you will do something that will transform conditions here in Alabama. And so yes, I'm not worried this afternoon, however dark it may be, however difficult it may be. I know that it is true that truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. There's another part of that great statement, yet that scaffold sways the future. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed the earth will rise again. The Bible is right. You shall reap what you sow. We shall overcome. The most damaging effects of segregation is what it has done to the soul of the segregated as well as the segregator. They've left the segregated with a false sense of inferiority, and have left the segregator with a false sense of superiority. And so because of the legacy of slavery and segregation, many Negroes lost faith in themselves, and many felt that they were inferior, but then something happened to the Negro. Circumstances made it possible and necessary for him to travel more. The coming of the automobile, the upheavals of 2 world wars, the Great Depression. And so his rural plantation background gradually gave way to urban industrial life. Even his economic life was rising through the growth of industry, influence of organized labor, expanded educational opportunities, and even his cultural life was rising through the steady decline of crippling illiteracy. And all of these forces conjoined caused the Negro to take a new look at himself. Negro masses all over began to reevaluate themselves. Negro came to feel that he's somebody, and his religion reveals to him that God loves all of his children, and that all men are made in his image, and that, figuratively speaking, every man from a bass back to a treble white is significant on God's piano. Many of you, I'm sure, have read that very interesting and arresting novel by Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. The thing we usually remember about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that he slept 20 years, but that he slept through a great revolution while he was peacefully snoring upon the mountain. A great revolution was taking place that would change the face of the earth, and Rip knew nothing about it. One of the great liabilities of history is the fact that all too many people find themselves sleeping through great periods of social change, and they fail to achieve the mental attitudes that the new conditions, the new situations demand. Now, I want to get into the meat of what I want to say, because I think we've heard a lot of Dr. King's eloquent speeches on the civil rights movement, explaining nonviolence, his tactics, his technique, its strategy, and so forth. But I really think he really broke the dish on this one. And all academians and non-academians, I want you to really pay attention to it, because I'm going to say I'm an old Southern boy from New Orleans myself. I was born in New Orleans. I really think he outdone himself. So without further ado, and Dr. King, as I said earlier, addressed the American Jewish Committee on May the 20th, 1965, in New York City. And he explains the sociological effects of mass action. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. King. In the past several years, it has become clear that the technique of mass, nonviolent direct action has not only become the accepted method of the civil rights movement, but beyond that, the vast majority of all Americans now support and approve it. What began as a limited expression of protest 10 years ago in Montgomery, Alabama, to integrate a bus line, has grown into a national phenomenon. Its history spiraled over a decade. The movement returned to Montgomery and involved in direct action. Nuns and priests, rabbis, Protestant ministers, and laity of every race, social class, and age. Many observers have been surprised and even shocked by these methods. The enemies of the civil rights movement have been quick and vocal to denounce them as undemocratic pressure tactics and even un-American in philosophy. Yet the truth is, no one can scorn nonviolent direct action or civil disobedience without canceling out American history. The first nonviolent direct action did not occur in Montgomery. Its roots go back to the American Revolution, when the boycott against British tea culminated in the Boston Tea Party. It was a favorite weapon. Suffragette movement when women had to fight for their right to vote. It was a technique that the trade unions employed to organize a mass production industry. Many here tonight can recall the events of the 30s, when federal court injunctions crippled and stifled union organizations, and even a WAGNAC could not facilitate a breakthrough. When the now historic sit-down strikes burst forth in 1937, a new national attitude congealed, and through the Congress of Industrial Organizations, a new major movement was born. Then, too, the nation was warned that the profit system was the target of this new form of struggle. Nearly 3 decades later, we are able to see that the profit system was not only unimpaired, but became significantly strengthened. If there is some confusion about the origins of nonviolent direct action, there's even more about civil disobedience. The two methods are not synonymous. The civil disobedience in its true sense has not been employed by Negroes in their struggle. To utilize civil disobedience in its authentic historical form involves defiance of fundamental national law. For example, when Antigone insisted upon her rights to follow her individual conscience and religious convictions to bury her brother, she was defying the king and the unqualified majesty of his law. When the Quakers refused to return runaway slaves, they were defying the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision. When Thoreau refused to pay taxes and protest against the Mexican War, he was breaking a fundamental legislative enactment and imposing the declaration of war of the Congress. And certainly we all understand this and I hardly approve of civil disobedience in a creative sense in many instances. But we must see that when the Negro today marches in the streets, He is not practicing civil disobedience because he's not challenging the Constitution, the Supreme Court, or the enactments of Congress. Instead, he seeks to uphold them. He may be violating local municipal ordinances or state laws, but it is these laws which constitute basic national laws. Negroes, by indirect action, are exposing the contradiction. The civil disobedience, or I should say uncivil disobedience in the situation, resting upon unjust foundations, is that of the segregationists. The Negroes have not willfully and frivolously violated the law. Many good-hearted people believe they do exactly that and forgive them on grounds that they endure appalling grievances. Yet these people forgive them for misdeeds that they are not committing. The truly unsocial lawbreaker disregards law because he, as an individual, is seeking a personal advantage. Negroes have never forgotten, even under the crushing burdens of injustice, that they are connected with the larger society, and that the roads they may obstruct and the public buildings they picket are used in common by all citizens. And for that reason, before a protest can be approved by responsible leadership, we must answer the following questions. 1, do we have a just grievance? Or is our purpose merely to create confusion for its own sake, as a form of revenge? 2, have we first used every form of normal means to eliminate the problems by negotiation, petition, and appropriate appeals to authorities? 3, having found these channels useless or forcibly closed to us, when we embark upon any type of lawbreaking, are we prepared to accept the consequences that society will inflict and to maintain, even under punishment, a sense of brotherhood? 4, do we have a clear program to relieve injustice, which does not inflict injustice upon others? And is that program reasonable and grounded into ethics, best traditions of our society? In establishing these prerequisite conditions, before employing direct action, the civil rights movement meets its responsibility to society and fulfills its obligations to democratic principles. Even after the movement embarks upon a program of nonviolent direct action or civil disobedience, its purposes are not narrowly confined to obtain benefits exclusively for the Negro. It is an axiom of nonviolent action and democracy that when any group struggles properly and justly to achieve their own rights, they enlarge the rights of all. This element is what makes both democracy and nonviolent action self-renewing and creative. What advantages do all Americans derive from the growth of nonviolent direct action and civil rights? First, the struggle dissolves the deceptive facade and reveals basic evils and contradictions in the society. Tens of millions of Americans a decade ago were ignorant of the actual conditions of life of the Negro, both in the North and in the South. Until there was awareness, there could be no consensus to make corrections. The long list of federal legislative enactments and Supreme Court decisions illustrate how extensive were the wrongs that blighted our society. Second, programs for remedying evils were not confined in their effects to Negroes. When Negroes took to the streets to demand job opportunities for themselves, they helped to stimulate a broad war on poverty concept, which ultimately will benefit more whites than Negroes. When Negroes, by direct action, seek to participate in the electoral process, they awakened the apathetic white, who so took his rights for granted that he neglected to use them. When Negroes boycotted schools, they did more than reveal classroom discrimination. They brought to the fore such criticisms as those of Dr. Conart, who had long charged we were seeking to utilize 19th century educational methods in conditions with 20th century urbanization, pushing through the issue of desegregation. There emerged a new and startling question of paramount importance to the whole population. What is quality education and how is it obtained for all under conditions of population growth, automation, and redistribution of population in sprawling cities? The sociologists will find much to ponder in the striking fact, and after the futile efforts to achieve brotherhood and ecumenicity by discussion and consciousness in the streets of Selma and Montgomery and at the Lincoln Memorial, there was the warmest and greatest expression of religious unity of Catholic, Protestant, and Jew in the nation's history. One of the most profound of all results of the Negro's upsurge has been its effects upon the youth of the nation. From the student-led sit-ins of 1960, an awakening of social thought and action has swept the campuses of the nation. In addition to overcoming the stall-defying effects of McCarthyism, the movement has in a few years changed the total description of America's youth, from the silent generation to the morally and socially concerned generation. From the single issue of civil rights, interest has broadened to questions of peace and poverty. From exclusively student involvement, the issue have now become the concern of faculty and scholar of every description. It is noteworthy that by the movement to re-examine our foreign policy, which the government now respects and welcomes, borrowed its title Teach-ins from the Civil Rights Movement. The student awakening and the student mass action rest upon no specific political tendency, but impresses a whole democratic political spectrum. I have discussed the social effects of nonviolent mass direct action at length because I believe it is too often limited in its application, merely to the civil rights movement. Perhaps if there had been a broader understanding usage of nonviolent direct action in Germany, when Hitler was rising and consolidating his power, and the brutal extermination of 6 million Jews and millions of other war dead might have been averted, and Germany might never have become totalitarian. The Protestants and Catholics had engaged in nonviolent direct action and have made the oppression of the Jews their very own oppression, and have come out in the street beside the Jew to scrub the sidewalk, and had Gentiles worn the still stigmatizing yellow armbands by the millions, a unique form of mass resistance to the Nazi regime. I'm fully aware that the terror and the intimidation and the brutality and the force that the fascists were so quick to use. I'm also aware that in the South today, some races of the same mentality have been curbed in their resistance to nonviolent action when practiced on a mass scale. Today, people all over the world should be engaging in mass action to protest anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. There's a dangerous silence today which unintentionally encourages evil to flourish. As Albert Einstein writes when he said, "The world is in greater peril from those who tolerate evil than from those who actively commit it." And isn't it true what President Kennedy warned? Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. And should the nation ever forget the Syrian Empire Rabbi Yaakov Prince's admonition as he spoke at the March on Washington in 1963, when I was a rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime. I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned in my life and under tragic circumstances is that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most shameful, the most disgraceful of all problems is silence. A great people which have created a great civilization have become a nation of silent onlookers. They remain silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers, America must not remain silent. Not merely Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act from the president down to the humblest of us, not for the sake of the Negro, but for the sake of the image, the ideas, and the aspirations of America itself. Now let me proclaim here now that I'm still convinced that the philosophy and practice of nonviolence affords the more excellent way of improving the inadequacies existing in the American social system. The method of nonviolent resistance is effective, and that it has a way of disarming the opponent. It exposes his moral defenses, it weakens his morale, and at the same time it works on his conscience. I believe we will win it because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. It is time to reorder our national priorities. All those who now speak of goodwill and who praise the works of such groups as the President's Commission now have the gravest responsibility to stand up and act for the social changes that are necessary to conquer racism here in America. If we as a society fail, I feel that we will learn very shortly that racism is a sickness unto death. Thank you, audience, for listening. Take heed to those words. Very powerful words. To all the critics of Dr. King, he was more than a going around the country rabble-rouser, speech talker. He was giving you words of truth that can move this nation forward, as we hope to continue to do from those days of the civil rights era and movement. Let us move forward, as Dr. King would say, the whole world into the promised land with this worldwide marketing movement. Instead of entitled Worldwide Silver, SILVER, $S, Civil Rights Movement. To world leaders, let's disarm ourselves. We don't want World War III. Nobody wins with World War anything. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go with worldwide one. I call upon my president, the Honorable Donald John Trump, NATO. I call on Mr. Putin. This is Xi Jinping of China. I hope I'm saying that, sir. And all the other nations. Let's sit down. We're bigger than that. Let's deny violence as victory. We're bigger than that. As closing Dr. King said it, and I have to agree. We're at the point where it's no longer a question of violence or non-violence. If we use those missiles, I can assure you, and I'm not a military man, but I guarantee you, it's non-violence or non-existence. Nobody wins. Nobody wins. May God bless you and your family this Christmas holiday. This is Winston Michael Ray, signing out.